The earth trembled beneath Scarlett Cooper's feet. A warning too late as the Silver Creek mine supports groaned like dying beasts. In that terrible moment, as dust choked the air and darkness swallowed the lantern light, 20-year-old Scarlett knew the mountain was about to claim her just as it had claimed so many others before. The year was 1876, and Silver Creek, Colorado, was a town built on dreams of fortune and the harsh reality of what men would do to find it. Scarlett hadn't wanted to enter the mine that day. As the only female assayer in the territory, she preferred the precision of her testing equipment to the suffocating confines of tunnels carved into the unforgiving earth. But when Alexander Walton, the mine owner, had insisted she personally inspect a promising new vein, refusing would have meant losing her position, a position that kept her independent in a world where women were expected to depend on men. "Miss Cooper, just a quick look," Alexander had said with that oily smile that never reached his eyes. "I need your professional assessment before I bring in additional investors." Now, as rocks crashed down around her and support beams splintered like matchsticks, Scarlett realized the true cost of her compliance. The new tunnel had been hastily dug, improperly supported a death trap disguised as opportunity. She scrambled backward as the ground heaved, but the exit disappeared behind a cascade of stone and dirt. A scream tore from her throat, swallowed by the mountain's fury. Something struck her shoulder, sending her sprawling. The lantern shattered, plunging her into absolute darkness. Then silence. A silence so complete it seemed to have weight, pressing against her eardrums. Scarlett lay still, afraid even breathing might trigger another collapse. Dust filled her lungs and she coughed weakly, each movement sending pain lancing through her trapped leg. "Help," she whispered, then louder, "Help!" But her voice only bounced off the stone walls of her tomb, returning to mock her. No one knew she was here. Alexander had sent the regular miners home early, insisting on a private inspection. Had he known? The thought chilled her more than the cool underground air. 20 miles away, Xavier Porter guided his horse along a narrow mountain trail, his body swaying in rhythm with the animal's steady gait. At 25, Xavier had already lived several lifetimes cavalry scout, bounty hunter, and now a wandering cowboy with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and the freedom of the open country. His weathered face and calloused hands told stories of hard work and harder fights, but his eyes remained clear and sharp, taking in every detail of the landscape around him. He was heading for Silver Creek, following rumors of work at the mines. Not mining, Xavier had no desire to burrow into the earth like a mole, but perhaps guarding shipments or breaking horses. Anything to earn enough money for supplies before winter set in. As the trail curved around a ridge, Xavier pulled up short. Ahead, a group of men huddled beside the road, their horses stamping nervously. Something in their posture furtive, tense, raised the hairs on the back of his neck. Xavier's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip as he approached cautiously. "Afternoon," he called, keeping his voice neutral. The men spun around and Xavier counted 5 of them, all wearing the dust and grime of miners. One stepped forward, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard. "You heading to Silver Creek, stranger?" the man asked, his voice tight with tension. Xavier nodded slowly. "That's the plan." "Something wrong?" The men exchanged glances before the spokesman continued. "There's been a collapse at the Silver Creek mine. West Tunnel just came down about an hour ago." "Anyone hurt?" Xavier asked, a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He'd seen mine disasters before, had pulled broken bodies from the rubble in Nevada 3 years back. "Don't know yet. Owner says no one was in there, but—" The man trailed off, shaking his head. Jimmy here says he saw the Cooper girl going in with Walton just before it happened. Now Walton's saying she left town this morning. The Cooper girl, Xavier questioned. Scarlett Cooper. Town's assayer. Smart as a whip and pretty as a sunrise. Another miner piped up. Only woman I ever seen who can tell gold from fool's gold just by looking at it. The first miner nodded. Walton's been sweet on her for months, but she won't give him the time of day. Now he's acting strange, won't let us dig where Jimmy says he saw them go in. Xavier studied their faces, reading the mixture of concern and suspicion. And you fellas are heading to town for the sheriff, the bearded man said. But Sheriff Daniels is in Walton's pocket, might not do much good. Xavier nodded thoughtfully. The collapse site how far from here? About 3 miles that way. The miner pointed back the direction they'd come. You can see the mine entrance from the north ridge. West tunnel's marked with a red flag. Xavier made his decision instantly. You men get the sheriff. I'll ride ahead and take a look. You a mining man? One of the younger miners asked skeptically. Xavier shook his head. Cavalry. Seen my share of rescue work. He didn't elaborate on the battles, the cave-ins, the desperate search for survivors after disasters both natural and man-made. The bearded miner studied him for a moment, then nodded. Name's Gus Miller. Those miners are my friends. If there's someone trapped in there, I'll do what I can, Xavier promised, already turning his horse toward the mine. The sun was beginning its westward descent as Xavier crested the ridge overlooking Silver Creek Mine. Below, he could see men moving around the main entrance, but the area near a red-flagged tunnel stood conspicuously empty. Xavier dismounted, tethering his horse to a scrub pine before making his way down the rocky slope. As he approached, a well-dressed man broke away from the group and intercepted him, hand raised. This is private property, the man announced, his voice carrying the sharp edge of authority. The mine is closed due to a collapse. Xavier sized him up quickly. Expensive clothes, clean hands, a watch chain that glinted gold in the afternoon sun. This would be Alexander Walton, the mine owner. Heard about that, Xavier said casually. Also heard someone might be trapped inside. Walton's face hardened. You heard wrong. My men were all accounted for before the collapse. Now I suggest you move along. We don't need sightseers. Xavier didn't move. What about Scarlett Cooper? I was told she was seen entering the west tunnel with you earlier today. Something flashed in Walton's eyes, fear or anger. Xavier couldn't be sure. Miss Cooper left town this morning for Denver. Whoever told you otherwise is mistaken. Strange coincidence, Xavier remarked, her leaving just before a tunnel collapse. I don't have to explain myself to a drifter, Walton snapped. Sheriff's on his way. You'd best be gone when he arrives. Xavier noticed several miners watching the exchange, their expressions guarded but intent. One caught his eye and made a subtle gesture toward the red flag tunnel. Message received. I'll just water my horse at your creek before moving on, Xavier said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. He walked away slowly, making a show of leading his horse to the creek that ran alongside the mining operation. Once there, he surveyed the area carefully. 3 men guarded the west tunnel entrance, more security than seemed necessary for an empty, collapsed tunnel. Beyond them, Xavier could see the damage a partial cave-in that had taken down the upper section of the entrance. As he pretended to attend to his horse, the miner who had signaled him earlier approached under the pretense of filling a water bucket. Name's Charlie, the man murmured without looking directly at Xavier. Jimmy's sure he saw Miss Cooper go in there. Walton came out alone about 20 minutes later, looking mighty pleased with himself. Not 10 minutes after, we heard the collapse. Xavier nodded slightly. Any other way into that tunnel? old ventilation shaft about 100 yards up the hillside. Might be too narrow for a man your size, though. I'll manage, Xavier said grimly. Can you create a distraction in about 15 minutes? Charlie's eyes glinted. Been wanting to punch Walton's foreman for months. Reckon now's as good a time as any. Xavier allowed himself a small smile. Don't get yourself killed. Just need their attention elsewhere for a bit. You find her, Charlie said, his voice suddenly fierce. Miss Cooper's good people. Only one who ever stood up to Walton when he tried to cheat us on ore values. With a plan in motion, Xavier retreated into the trees, circling around to approach the hillside above the west tunnel. Sure enough, he found the ventilation shaft a narrow opening reinforced with rotting timber. Testing the edges, he found them solid enough, though the shaft itself looked barely wide enough to admit his shoulders. Xavier stripped off his coat and gun belt, securing them to his leg with his belt. Taking a deep breath, he lowered himself feet first into the opening. The shaft descended at a steep angle, forcing him to brace against the sides to control his descent. Dirt and small rocks showered down around him as he inched deeper into the mountain. Just as the shaft began to feel impossibly tight, Xavier heard shouting from outside Charlie's distraction right on time. Moments later, his boots hit the floor of a tunnel, and he squeezed through the last narrow section, dropping into the darkness of the West Passage. The air was thick with dust and the smell of disturbed earth. Xavier retrieved a match from his pocket and struck it against the wall, the small flame illuminating a scene of devastation. The tunnel ahead was completely blocked by fallen rock and splintered timbers. "Hello," he called, keeping his voice low enough not to trigger another collapse. "Anyone in here?" In the darkness beyond the tomb of stone and timber, Scarlett lay with her eyes closed, conserving her strength. The pain in her trapped leg had dulled to a persistent throb, and thirst clawed at her throat. She had no idea how long she'd been buried. Hours, certainly, perhaps an entire day. The air was growing stale, and with each shallow breath, she felt her hopes dimming. When she heard the voice so faint it might have been imagination, Scarlett's eyes flew open, staring into the impenetrable darkness. "Hello," the voice came again, slightly louder, a man's voice unfamiliar. "Here," she tried to shout, but her dry throat produced only a raspy whisper. Scarlett coughed, summoning moisture to her mouth, and tried again. "I'm here, help me." The silence that followed stretched so long that Scarlett feared she'd imagined the voice. Then came the sound of movement, small rocks shifting, the crunch of boots on gravel. "Keep talking," the voice called. "I need to find where you are." Hope surged through Scarlett, giving her renewed strength. "I'm trapped behind the rockfall. My leg is pinned down. Please hurry, the air is getting bad." Xavier pressed his ear against the pile of rubble, trying to pinpoint the woman's location. Her voice was weak, but determined she was alive, at least for now. Judging by the sound, she was perhaps 15 feet beyond the collapse, possibly in a pocket created when support beams had fallen at an angle. "I'm going to get you out," he called, assessing the rubble pile. "My name's Xavier Porter. I'm going to start moving these rocks. If you hear anything shifting or groaning, you shout right away, understand?" "Yes," came the faint reply. "I'm Scarlett Cooper." "Nice to meet you, Miss Cooper," Xavier said, trying to keep his tone conversational as he carefully began removing smaller rocks from the top of the pile. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances." He heard what might have been a weak laugh. "Mr. Porter, when I'm out of here, I'll be happy to meet you properly over the finest dinner in Silver Creek." "I'll hold you to that," Xavier replied, setting aside another stone. The work was painstaking. Each rock had to be evaluated for its position in the pile. Remove the wrong one, and the entire mass could shift, potentially causing another collapse that would bury Scarlett completely. Sweat soon soaked his shirt as Xavier worked methodically, creating a small tunnel through the upper portion of the debris. The air grew increasingly stale, and he knew Scarlett's situation must be far worse on the other side. "Keep talking to me, Miss Cooper," he called. "Tell me about yourself." For a moment there was silence, then her voice came again, fainter than before. I'm the town assayer. Test ore samples for miners. Tell them what they are worth." "A woman assayer, that's something," Xavier remarked, grunting as he shifted a larger stone. "How'd you learn that trade, my father?" Her voice trailed off into a cough. "Taught me everything before he died. Mining fever." 3 years ago. Xavier worked faster, alarmed by the weakening of her voice. "I'm getting closer, Miss Cooper. Just hold on." After what seemed like hours, Xavier created an opening large enough to see through. Striking another match, he peered into the space beyond. The flame illuminated a small pocket in the rubble, and there, pale and dust-covered, was Scarlett Cooper. She blinked in the sudden light, her green eyes standing out starkly against her dirt-streaked face. A fallen beam pinned her left leg, and dried blood matted her hair where something had struck her head. But she was alive, conscious, and the look of desperate hope on her face seized Xavier's heart in a way he hadn't expected. "I can see you," he said, his voice rough with emotion and exertion. "I'm going to widen this hole, then come help with that beam." "Hurry," she whispered. "Please." Xavier redoubled his efforts, tearing at the rocks with his bare hands now that he could see the path forward. His fingers bled as sharp edges cut into them, but he barely noticed the pain. All that mattered was reaching the trapped woman before the mountain claimed her. Finally, the opening was wide enough for him to squeeze through. Xavier pulled himself into the pocket of space, immediately moving to Scarlett's side. Up close, her condition was worse than he'd first thought. Her face was gray with dust and pain, lips cracked from dehydration. The beam across her leg was massive, a main support that had been improperly set, judging by the splintered end. "Water," Xavier said, retrieving a small canteen from his belt. He supported her head gently as she drank, careful not to let her have too much at once. "Thank you," Scarlett murmured, her voice stronger after the water. I thought no one was coming." Xavier examined the beam pinning her leg. "Let's get this off you first, then you can thank me properly over that dinner." A ghost of a smile touched Scarlett's lips. "Deal." The beam was too heavy to lift directly, so Xavier scoured the debris around them, finding a sturdy piece of timber to use as a lever. Positioning it carefully, he prepared to lift the beam. "This will hurt," he warned Scarlett. "When the pressure releases, blood will flow back into your leg. Be ready." Scarlett nodded, bracing herself. Xavier threw his weight against the lever, muscles straining as the beam began to rise incrementally. Scarlett bit back a cry as the pressure on her leg eased, allowing circulation to return with a rush of excruciating sensation. With a final heave, Xavier lifted the beam high enough for Scarlett to pull herself free. Immediately, he let the timber drop and moved to her side, examining her injury. The leg wasn't broken, but badly bruised and swollen. She wouldn't be walking out on her own. "We need to move quickly," Xavier said, glancing back at his makeshift tunnel. "This whole pocket could come down any minute, and I don't think your friend Walton will be sending a rescue party." Scarlett's eyes widened. "Walton?" He knew the support was failing. "I saw it, told him we needed to evacuate. He hit me, said no one would believe me anyway. The last thing I remember before the collapse was him walking toward the exit." Xavier's jaw tightened. "He's outside now, telling everyone you left town this morning." "He tried to kill me," Scarlett whispered, the reality of the situation sinking in. "If you hadn't come." "But I did," Xavier said firmly. And now we're both getting out of here. Can you put your arms around my neck?" Scarlett nodded, wincing as Xavier carefully gathered her into his arms. She was too light, suggesting the slender frame beneath her practical dress held more grit than physical strength. Yet as she wrapped her arms around his neck, Xavier felt a surprising steadiness in her grip. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her face close enough to his that he could feel her breath on his cheek. Moving carefully, Xavier carried Scarlett to the opening he'd created. "This'll be tight. I'll need to go first, then pull you through. Can you manage a few seconds on your own?" At her nod, Xavier reluctantly set her down, then squeezed through the narrow passage. Turning immediately, he reached back for her. Scarlett dragged herself to the opening, gritting her teeth against the pain in her injured leg. Their hands met, locked, and Xavier pulled steadily, guiding her through the tight space until she emerged into the relatively wider tunnel beyond. Without hesitation, he lifted her again, cradling her against his chest as he navigated the debris-strewn passage toward the main tunnel. The ventilation shaft he'd used would be impossible for them to ascend together, especially with Scarlett's injury. Their only option was the main entrance, which meant confronting Walton and his men. "Xavier," Scarlett said softly as they approached the intersection with the main tunnel. "If Walton sees me alive—" "I know," Xavier replied grimly, "but we have allies outside. The miners, they're the ones who told me you were trapped." Hope flared in Scarlett's eyes. "Gus, Charlie for certain. He helped me find a way in." A faint smile touched Scarlett's lips. "Good men. Better than most in this town." As they reached the main tunnel, Xavier set Scarlett down gently, propping her against the wall. "Wait here a moment. I need to see what we're facing." Moving silently, he crept toward the entrance, staying in the shadows. Daylight spilled in from outside, and Xavier could see 3 men still guarding the collapsed entrance. Beyond them, raised voices suggested some kind of commotion in the main yard, Charlie's distraction still ongoing, or perhaps the sheriff had arrived. Xavier returned to Scarlett, crouching beside her. 3 guards, but something's happening outside that has their attention. If we move quickly, we might make it past them before they can react." Scarlett nodded, determination hardening her features despite her exhaustion. "I can't run, but I can move with your help." Xavier helped her to her feet, supporting her with an arm around her waist. She leaned heavily against him but remained upright, her breathing shallow but controlled. "On 3, Xavier murmured. 1, 2, 3. They moved forward as quickly as Scarlett's injury allowed, emerging from the shadows into the dimly lit main tunnel. For a crucial moment, the guard's attention remained fixed on whatever was happening outside. Then one turned, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of Scarlett alive and upright. "What the?" he began, reaching for his gun. Xavier was faster. In one fluid motion, he drew the revolver from his holster and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The report echoed deafeningly in the confined space, sending dust and small fragments raining down. "Next one's not a warning," Xavier called, his voice steady. "Step aside." The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. They hadn't expected resistance, certainly not an armed man escorting the woman who was supposed to be dead and buried. Outside, the gunshot had drawn attention. Shouts rang out and boots pounded toward the entrance. Xavier tensed, preparing for a fight when Charlie's voice rang out. "Miss Cooper, you in there?" "She's here," Xavier shouted back. "Alive!" Walton tried to bury her. A moment of silence followed, then a roar of angry voices. The guards at the entrance glanced nervously over their shoulders, then back at Xavier's unwavering gun. Self-preservation won out, they stepped aside, hands raised. Xavier and Scarlett moved forward, emerging from the darkness of the mine into the fading light of late afternoon. A crowd had gathered miners mostly, faces grim with anger as they formed a protective semicircle around the entrance. At the edges, Xavier spotted Sheriff Daniels looking decidedly uncomfortable, and beyond him, Alexander Walton's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Miss Cooper." Charlie pushed forward, relief washing over his weathered face. "Thank God," Scarlett managed a weak smile. "Thanks to Mr. Porter here, he dug through the collapse with his bare hands." All eyes turned to Xavier, taking in his dust-covered form, the blood on his hands, and the protective way he supported Scarlett against his side. "She needs a doctor," Xavier said simply. "And Mr. Walton there needs a cell." Sheriff Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Now hold on, we don't know what happened here." "I know," Scarlett interrupted, her voice gaining strength as she faced her would-be murderer. "Alexander Walton deliberately trapped me in that mine when I pointed out unsafe conditions. He left me to die, then told everyone I'd left town." Walton stepped forward, his face a mask of indignation. "Preposterous! The girl's clearly delirious from her ordeal. I've been saying all along that no one was in that tunnel." "Then how'd she get in there?" Gus Miller demanded, stepping forward. "And why'd you post guards to keep us from digging? If you were so sure it was empty," the crowd of miners murmured angrily, moving closer to Walton, who took an involuntary step back. "Sheriff," Xavier said quietly, "you might want to arrest him before these men decide to dispense their own justice." Sheriff Daniels hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Alexander Walton, you're coming with me while we sort this out." As the sheriff led a protesting Walton away, Xavier felt Scarlett sag against him, her remaining strength giving out. Without a word, he swept her into his arms again, cradling her as gently as if she were made of glass. "The doctor's just down the main street," Charlie said, gesturing toward town. "I'll show you." The crowd parted as Xavier carried Scarlett away from the mine that had nearly become her tomb, her head resting trustingly against his shoulder. As they moved toward town, he felt her stir slightly. "Xavier," she murmured, so softly only he could hear. "I believe I owe you a dinner." Despite everything, Xavier found himself smiling. "Let's get you well first, Miss Cooper. Then we can discuss payment." Her answering smile, weak though it was, warmed something inside him that had been cold for longer than he cared to remember. "Doctor." Samuel Wright's practice occupied the front rooms of a modest house at the edge of Silver Creek's Main Street. The aging physician took one look at Scarlett's condition and immediately directed Xavier to place her on the examination table in his back room. "Out, all of you, doctor." Wright ordered the crowd of concerned miners who had followed them. "Miss Cooper needs air and quiet, not an audience." As the men reluctantly dispersed, the doctor turned to Xavier. "You too, young man. I need to examine her properly." Xavier hesitated, reluctant to leave Scarlett's side after everything they'd been through. She seemed to sense his concern, reaching out to touch his hand briefly. "It's all right," she assured him. "I'm safe now, thanks to you." Still, Xavier lingered at the doorway. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." Dr. Wright shooed him out, closing the door firmly. Xavier paced the small waiting room, running a hand through his dust-caked hair. Now that the immediate danger was past, he found himself thinking about Scarlett Cooper in a way that surprised him, not just concern for her welfare, but a deeper interest. There was something about her courage, her determination to survive, that resonated with him. After what seemed an eternity, Dr. Wright emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. "She'll recover," he announced without preamble. "Severe bruising to the leg, mild concussion, dehydration, all treatable. What that young woman needs most now is rest and care. Can I see her?" Xavier asked, trying to keep the eagerness from his voice. Dr. Wright studied him for a moment, then nodded. Briefly, "She's asking for you anyway." He placed a hand on Xavier's arm as he passed. "She says you dug through that collapse with your bare hands. Let me take a look at those after you've spoken with her." Xavier nodded absently, already moving toward the examination room. Inside, he found Scarlett propped up on pillows, her face and hands washed clean of mine dust, her injured leg bandaged. She looked pale but alert, and the smile that blossomed when she saw him made his heart skip. "My rescuer," she said softly. Xavier moved to her side, suddenly aware of how filthy he still was. "How are you feeling?" "Like a mountain fell on me," Scarlett replied with a weak laugh. "But I'll live, thanks to you." "Anyone would have done the same," Xavier said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Scarlett shook her head. "No, not anyone. Alexander Walton left me to die. Most men in this town wouldn't cross him to save anyone." Her green eyes held his steadily. "What you did was extraordinary, Xavier Porter." Before he could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices approached the doctor's house, and moments later the door burst open to admit Sheriff Daniels, his face grim. "Miss Cooper," he said, nodding to Scarlett. "Feeling up to answering some questions?" Dr. Wright appeared behind the sheriff, clearly annoyed. "My patient needs rest, Sheriff." "This can't wait," Daniels insisted. "Walton's claiming Miss Cooper was stealing gold samples, says that's why she was in the mine without authorization. Says the collapse was an accident he didn't know about until after she'd already left town." Xavier tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun, but Scarlett's calm voice stopped him. "That's a lie, Sheriff, and you know it," she said firmly. "I've been the town assayer for 3 years. I've never stolen so much as a speck of dust. I was in that mine because Alexander Walton specifically requested my professional assessment of a new vein." She paused, gathering strength. "When I pointed out the dangerous condition of the supports, he struck me and left me there. I heard him taunting me as he walked away, saying no one would look for me because he'd tell everyone I'd left town." Sheriff Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "It's your word against his, Miss Cooper." "And mine," Xavier interjected. "I saw the condition of that tunnel. Those supports didn't fail naturally, they were compromised. And why would Walton post guards to prevent rescue efforts if he truly believed no one was trapped?" The sheriff glanced between them, clearly wrestling with divided loyalties. Alexander Walton owned half the town, but the miners' angry faces outside suggested which way the wind was blowing. "I'll need formal statements from both of you," he finally said. "For now, Walton stays in a cell. Doctor, how soon can Miss Cooper be moved?" "She shouldn't be moved at all for at least 2 days," Dr. Wright insisted. "She can stay here," Sheriff Daniels decided. "I'll post a deputy outside. If Walton did try to kill her, best not take chances." After the sheriff left, Dr. Wright insisted on examining Xavier's hands, clucking disapprovingly at the cuts and abrasions that covered them. As the doctor cleaned and bandaged the wounds, Xavier's gaze kept drifting to Scarlett, who watched the procedure with concern in her eyes. "You'll need to change these bandages daily," Dr. Wright instructed, finishing his work. "And try not to use your hands too much for a few days." Xavier nodded absently, already wondering how he could stay in Silver Creek to ensure Scarlett's safety. His drifting lifestyle didn't lend itself to lingering in one place, but the thought of leaving while Walton remained a threat was unacceptable. As if reading his thoughts, Scarlett spoke up. "Dr. Wright, does Mr. Porter need to stay nearby for follow-up treatment?" The doctor raised an eyebrow, glancing between them with a knowing look. "Indeed, Miss Cooper. Daily checkups would be advisable. Perhaps you could assist once you're mobile again. Make sure the bandages are changed properly." A faint blush colored Scarlett's cheeks. I'd be happy to help. It's the least I can do. Then it's settled, Dr. Wright announced. Mr. Porter, Mrs. Holloway's boarding house across the street has a spare room. I'll let her know you're coming on medical recommendation. Xavier found himself smiling. Much obliged, doctor. I do find myself in need of lodgings for a while. As dusk settled over Silver Creek, Xavier sat on the porch of Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, watching the doctor's house across the street. A deputy stood guard outside, hat pulled low against the evening chill. Inside, Scarlett Cooper rested, safe for the moment. Xavier flexed his bandaged hands, feeling the sting of cuts earned in the desperate dig through collapsed stone and timber. Strange how life worked 24 hours ago. He'd been a drifter with no destination in mind. Now he felt anchored to this town by a woman he barely knew but had risked his life to save. He wasn't foolish enough to mistake gratitude for something more, but there had been something in Scarlett's eyes when she looked at him, something beyond simple appreciation. And the way his heart had seized when he'd first glimpsed her through that narrow opening in the rubble. That wasn't something he could easily explain away. Xavier Porter had never been one to put down roots. But as he watched the lights of Silver Creek wink on one by one, he wondered if perhaps the time had come to stop running from what he'd lost and start building something new. The next morning brought chaos to Silver Creek. Xavier had just finished breakfast in Mrs. Holloway's dining room when Charlie burst through the front door, face flushed with anger and exertion. "Walton's gone," he announced to the room at large. "Sheriff claims he escaped during the night, but everyone knows Daniels let him walk." Xavier was on his feet instantly. "When?" "Must have been after midnight. By the time morning shift started at the mine, Walton was already giving orders like nothing happened." Charlie's eyes narrowed. "He's acting mighty confident for a man who should be facing charges." Xavier grabbed his hat. "The deputy outside the doctor's." "Still there," Charlie assured him. "But Walton's been making threats, says Miss Cooper's going to regret her lies about him." Without another word, Xavier strode from the boarding house, crossing quickly to Dr. Wright's residence. The deputy, a young man barely out of his teens, straightened nervously at his approach. "Morning, Mr. Porter," the deputy greeted him. "Doc said you'd be by." "Walton's escaped," Xavier said bluntly. "Or been released. Either way, he's making threats against Miss Cooper." The deputy paled slightly. "Sheriff didn't tell me nothing about that. Just said to stay put till noon, then he'd send a replacement." "I'll be inside," Xavier said, not waiting for a response as he entered the house. Dr. Wright met him in the hallway, looking troubled. "I take it you've heard about Walton," Xavier nodded grimly. "How is she?" "Awake and remarkably improved," the doctor replied. "The leg's still painful, but the swelling has decreased significantly. She's a strong young woman, Mr. Porter." As if summoned by their conversation, Scarlett's voice called from the back room. "Dr. Wright, is someone there?" "Your rescuer has returned, Miss Cooper," the doctor called back with a knowing smile at Xavier. "Shall I send him in, please?" came the immediate reply. Xavier found Scarlett sitting up in bed, her hair brushed and pinned back, wearing what appeared to be a borrowed nightgown several sizes too large for her slender frame. Despite the circumstances, she looked almost radiant compared to the dust-covered, dehydrated woman he'd pulled from the mine. "You look better," he said, suddenly awkward in her presence. Scarlett smiled, gesturing to a chair beside the bed. "Amazing what clean water and a night's sleep can do. How are your hands?" Xavier glanced down at his bandaged palms, flexing them slightly. "Healing. Dr. Wright knows his business." A moment of silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Xavier spoke the words he'd come to say. "Walton's free. Sheriff either let him go or he escaped. Either way, he's making threats against you." Scarlett's smile faded, but her expression remained remarkably composed. I expected as much. Alexander Walton isn't a man who accepts defeat gracefully. You're taking this calmly, Xavier observed. Panic won't help, Scarlett replied simply. Besides, I've been dealing with men like Walton since my father died. Men who think a woman alone is easy prey. Xavier leaned forward, his gaze intense. You don't have to face this alone, Scarlett. Her eyes widened slightly at his use of her first name, but she didn't object. You've done more than enough already, Xavier. I can't ask you to stay and fight my battles. You're not asking. I'm offering. The words came without conscious thought, but Xavier realized he meant them completely. At least until Walton is dealt with properly. Scarlett studied him, her green eyes searching his face. Why? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Xavier considered his answer carefully. I've spent the last 5 years drifting from place to place, never staying long enough to form connections. Yesterday, when I dug through that collapse, it was the first time in years I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. A soft blush colored Scarlett's cheeks. That's quite a declaration from a man I've known for less than a day. Xavier smiled ruefully. I suppose it is. But near-death experiences have a way of clarifying things. Before Scarlett could respond, Dr. Wright entered, carrying a tray with a pot of coffee and 2 cups. Thought you might appreciate this, he said, setting it down. And Miss Cooper, if you're feeling up to it, Sheriff Daniels is here to take your formal statement. Scarlett's expression hardened. The same sheriff who conveniently allowed Alexander Walton to escape justice. The very same, Dr. Wright confirmed grimly. Though he claims Walton overpowered a deputy and fled. Nobody believes it, of course. Xavier rose, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. I'll stay while he takes your statement. Sheriff Daniels proved professionally courteous, but clearly uncomfortable, as he recorded Scarlett's account of the mine collapse. His eyes avoided hers when she described Alexander Walton's deliberate abandonment, and he made no mention of Walton's current freedom. Xavier remained standing throughout the interview, his presence a silent challenge to the sheriff's authority. That should cover it, Daniels finally said, closing his notebook. I'll send word to the circuit judge in Denver. He'll decide if there's enough evidence for formal charges. And in the meantime, Xavier asked pointedly, Walton walks free, making threats against the key witness against him. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. I've spoken to Mr. Walton. He's given his word he'll keep his distance from Miss Cooper. Scarlett laughed bitterly. The word of a man who left me to die. How comforting. Sheriff Daniels rose, gathering his hat. I understand your concerns, Miss Cooper, but my hands are tied. Without physical evidence, without the courage to stand up to the richest man in town, you mean? Xavier interrupted coldly. The sheriff's face reddened. Watch yourself, Porter. You're not a local, and troublemakers don't last long in Silver Creek. Is that a threat, Sheriff? Xavier asked quietly. Daniels broke eye contact first. Just stating facts. Good day, Miss Cooper. I hope you recover quickly. With a final nod, he left the room. Well, Scarlett said after a moment, it seems Silver Creek's justice system remains firmly in Alexander Walton's pocket. Xavier moved to the window, watching the sheriff mount his horse and ride away. We can't count on the law for protection. Once you're well enough to travel, I think you should consider leaving Silver Creek. And go where? Scarlett asked, an edge of bitterness in her voice. This is my home. My livelihood is here. Everything I've built since my father died is in this town. Your life is worth more than a business, Xavier argued, turning to face her. Scarlett's chin lifted defiantly. I will not be driven away by Alexander Walton. I refuse to give him that satisfaction. Xavier recognized the steel in her voice, the same determination that had kept her alive in that collapsed tunnel. He nodded slowly. "Then we find another way to deal with him." "We?" Scarlett questioned, her expression softening. "I told you I'm not leaving until this is resolved," Xavier reminded her. "I keep my promises, Miss Cooper." A small smile touched her lips. "I believe you do, Mr. Porter, and I believe I still owe you that dinner." The next few days established a routine that felt surprisingly comfortable. Xavier spent his mornings helping at the mine. Charlie and Gus had offered him temporary work as a security guard, keeping an eye on the operations while they assessed the damage from the collapse. The miners, grateful for his role in rescuing Scarlett, accepted him readily into their ranks. Each afternoon, he would visit Scarlett at the doctor's house, bringing news from town and sitting with her as she gradually regained her strength. Their conversations flowed easily, ranging from her childhood in Denver with a father obsessed with finding gold, to his years in the cavalry and his subsequent wanderings across the Western territories. "Why did you leave the cavalry?" Scarlett asked on the third afternoon as they shared tea in Dr. Wright's small garden. The doctor had declared she needed fresh air, and Xavier had carefully carried her to a chair under the apple tree. Xavier's expression grew distant. "Fought in too many battles that didn't make sense to me. Followed too many orders I didn't believe in." Scarlett studied him over the rim of her teacup. "And since then, you've been wandering for, how long?" "5 years, Xavier admitted. "Never staying more than a month or two in any place. Running to something or away from something." Scarlett asked softly. Xavier met her gaze, surprised by her perception. "Both, maybe. I lost someone. A woman I thought I'd spend my life with. She couldn't handle the uncertainty of being a cavalry wife. Married a shopkeeper while I was away fighting." Scarlett's face softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry." Xavier shrugged, the pain of the memory dulled by time. "It was years ago, but afterward I guess I didn't see much point in putting down roots." "And now?" Scarlett's question hung in the air between them. Before Xavier could answer, Dr. Wright emerged from the house, interrupting their conversation. "Good news, Miss Cooper. I believe you're well enough to return to your own home tomorrow, provided you continue to rest that leg." Scarlett's face lit up. "Truly, I can go home." The doctor nodded, though his expression remained serious. "With certain conditions. You'll need assistance for a few more days, and I'd prefer you weren't alone given the circumstances." All three knew he meant the threat posed by Alexander Walton, who had remained conspicuously absent from town since his escape, though his foreman continued to operate the mine. "I have a spare room," Scarlett said hesitantly, glancing at Xavier, "if Mr. Porter wouldn't mind staying." "For protection." Xavier felt a rush of warmth at the invitation, though he kept his expression carefully neutral. "I'd be happy to help if the doctor thinks it appropriate." Dr. Wright's eyes twinkled with barely concealed amusement. "Purely medicinal, of course. Miss Cooper needs assistance moving around, changing bandages. All very proper." "Of course," Xavier agreed, catching Scarlett's eye and sharing a small smile that suggested they both recognized the doctor's matchmaking efforts. The next morning, Xavier arrived at Dr. Wright's house to find Scarlett dressed in her own clothes, a practical navy blue dress that somehow managed to highlight the vivid green of her eyes. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and though she still looked pale, there was a healthy flush to her cheeks that hadn't been there days before. "Ready to go home?" he asked, offering his arm for support. Scarlett took it gratefully, leaning against him as they made their way carefully down the doctor's front steps. "More than ready. Dr. Wright has been kind, but I miss my own space." Xavier had arranged for Charlie's wagon to transport her the short distance to her home, a modest but well-maintained cottage at the edge of town. As they approached, Xavier noticed Scarlett tense slightly. "Something wrong?" he asked quietly. She nodded toward the house. "The front door, it's ajar. I always lock it when I leave." Xavier immediately helped her back into the wagon. "Stay here with Charlie. I'll check it out." Drawing his revolver, Xavier approached the cottage cautiously. The front door swung open at his touch, revealing a scene of deliberate destruction inside. Furniture had been overturned, drawers emptied onto the floor, and across the main room wall, someone had painted in large, crude letters, "Liars die." Xavier's jaw tightened as he quickly checked the rest of the small house, finding similar damage throughout. Scarlett's clothes had been torn from her wardrobe, her personal belongings scattered and broken. Only when he was certain the intruder was gone did he return to the wagon. "Scarlett," he said gently, "your home's been vandalized. It's pretty bad." Her face paled, but her voice remained steady. "Walton, it seems likely." Xavier hesitated, then added, "There's a threatening message on the wall. I think you should see it before deciding what to do next." Charlie helped Xavier support Scarlett as they entered the cottage. She gasped at the sight of the destruction, her hand tightening on Xavier's arm as she took in the painted threat. "He's escalating," Xavier said quietly. "This isn't just intimidation anymore." Scarlett surveyed the damage, her initial shock giving way to anger. "My home, my father's books, everything I own." Her voice hardened. "He thinks he can frighten me into leaving, into withdrawing my statement, Miss Cooper," Charlie said hesitantly. "Maybe you should consider it. Just until the circuit judge arrives. We all know what happened in that mine. You don't have to stay and face this." Scarlett shook her head firmly. "If I leave, Alexander Walton wins. He'll continue exploiting minors, cutting corners on safety, perhaps causing more deaths. No. I will not be driven away." Xavier admired her courage even as he worried for her safety. "Then we need to make sure you're protected. This house isn't secure enough." "She can stay at my place," Charlie offered. "My Maggie would welcome the company, and we've plenty of room now that our boys are grown." Xavier considered the offer. Charlie Miller was respected in the mining community, his home always full of visitors. It would be harder for Walton to target Scarlett there. "That's very kind, Charlie," Scarlett said, touching the older man's arm gratefully. "But I couldn't impose on your family." "It's no imposition," Charlie insisted. "Maggie would skin me alive if she heard I'd let you stay in danger." Decision made, Xavier helped gather what remained of Scarlett's undamaged belongings while Charlie cleared space in his wagon. As they worked, Xavier noticed Scarlett standing in her ruined parlor, staring at the threatening message with an expression of cold determination. "He won't win," she said, sensing Xavier's approach without turning. "My father always said the measure of a person is what they do when things are hardest. I won't fail his memory by running away." Xavier stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "Your father would be proud of you, Scarlett. Not many would stand their ground the way you have." She turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for staying. I don't know if I could do this alone." Without thinking, Xavier reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not alone, not anymore." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Charlie's voice from outside broke the spell, calling that the wagon was ready. As they left the violated sanctuary of Scarlett's home, Xavier made a silent vow. Alexander Walton would pay for what he'd done, not just the vandalism, but the mine collapse, the attempt on Scarlett's life, all of it. One way or another, justice would be served. The Miller household welcomed Scarlett with warmth that momentarily pushed aside the shadow of Alexander Walton's threats. Maggie Miller, A robust woman with silver-streaked dark hair and capable hands took one look at Scarlett's injured leg and pale face and immediately installed her in the best bedroom, declaring that monster Walton wouldn't dare approach her home. Xavier found himself included in the family's hospitality, invited to meals and treated as an honored guest rather than a hired guard. The Millers' home became a gathering place for miners sympathetic to Scarlett's cause, and each evening brought new allies sharing information and offering support. 4 days after the vandalism of Scarlett's home, as they sat around the dinner table, Gus Miller burst in with news that sent a ripple of tension through the gathering. "Circuit Judge is arriving tomorrow," he announced without preamble. "Word is Walton's already sent men to meet him at the stage station with a substantial welcome gift." Xavier exchanged a glance with Scarlett. They both knew what this meant. Walton was attempting to bribe the judge before he even heard the case. "We need to reach the judge first," Xavier said, rising from his chair, "before Walton's men can poison the well." "The stage doesn't arrive until noon," Charlie noted. "If you rode out at dawn, you could intercept it at Elk Creek Crossing. That's about 5 miles before the station." "I'll go," Xavier decided. "Scarlett, you should stay here where it's safe." To his surprise, Scarlett shook her head firmly. "No, the judge needs to hear my testimony directly, not filtered through intermediaries. I'm coming with you." "Your leg," Xavier began to protest. "Is healing well," Scarlett interrupted. "Dr. Wright said I could begin light riding yesterday. 5 miles at a gentle pace won't set back my recovery." Xavier recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and knew further argument would be futile. "All right, but at the first sign of trouble, you follow my instructions without question." "Agreed," Scarlett nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Agreed, Mr. Porter." They set out before dawn the next morning, Xavier on his own horse and Scarlett on a gentle mare borrowed from the Millers. The air was crisp with early autumn coolness as they rode slowly east, following the stage road toward Elk Creek Crossing. Scarlett's leg clearly pained her, but she made no complaint, sitting tall in the saddle with determined grace. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the landscape in golden light, Xavier found himself stealing glances at his companion. Something had changed between them during these days of shared danger and quiet conversations. What had begun as a rescue had evolved into something deeper, a connection he hadn't felt with anyone since his cavalry days. "You're staring," Scarlett observed without turning her head. Xavier smiled, caught. "Just making sure you're managing the ride." "I grew up on horseback," she reminded him. "My father had mining claims all over these mountains. By the time I was 12, I could ride all day without complaint." "Your father taught you more than just a saying," Xavier observed. Scarlett nodded, her expression softening with memory. "He believed a woman should be able to make her own way in the world. Said he never wanted me dependent on any man's charity or goodwill." A sad smile touched her lips. "I think he hoped I'd marry, but only for love, never necessity." "A progressive thinker," Xavier remarked. "Yes, not everyone appreciated his views. When he died and I took over the assaying business, many predicted I'd fail within months." Pride straightened her shoulders. 3 years later, miners come to me because they know I'll give them an honest valuation, even when the mine owners would prefer I didn't. "Which is why Walton wants you gone," Xavier concluded. "You're a threat to more than just his freedom, you threaten his control over the miners." "Precisely." Scarlett met his gaze directly. "So you see why I can't back down, even when it would be safer." Xavier nodded slowly. "I understand principles worth fighting for, Scarlett. I just don't want to see you hurt because of them." "Some things are worth the risk," she said quietly. They reached Elk Creek Crossing shortly before noon, positioning themselves at a bend in the road where they could see the approaching stagecoach without being immediately visible. Xavier helped Scarlett dismount, noting her wince of pain as her injured leg took her weight. "How bad?" he asked simply. "Manageable," she replied, which he was learning meant painful but endurable in Scarlett's stoic vocabulary. They didn't have long to wait. Within 20 minutes, the rumble of the stagecoach became audible, and soon the vehicle itself appeared, dust billowing behind it as it approached the crossing. Xavier stepped into the road, raising his hand to signal the driver. The coach slowed, the driver eyeing him suspiciously until he spotted Scarlett. "Miss Cooper," the driver called down in surprise. "Heard you was dead in that mine collapse." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Mr. Jenkins," Scarlett replied with a small smile. "We need to speak with Judge Harmon if he's aboard." The stagecoach door opened before the driver could respond, and a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes peered out. "I'm Judge Harmon. Who's asking for me?" Xavier stepped forward. "Sir, my name is Xavier Porter." "This is Miss Scarlett Cooper. We have urgent information regarding a case you'll be hearing in Silver Creek." The judge studied them both carefully before nodding. "Concerning Alexander Walton and the mine collapse, I presume? Step inside, both of you. We can talk as we travel." Relief washed over Xavier as he helped Scarlett into the coach. They'd reached the judge before Walton's men, the first piece of good fortune since this ordeal began. Inside the stagecoach, Judge Harmon proved to be a keen listener, his expression growing increasingly grave as Scarlett recounted her experience in the mine collapse and the subsequent threats and vandalism. Xavier added his own observations about the deliberate undermining of the support beams and the sheriff's suspicious handling of Walton's escape. When they finished, the judge sat in thoughtful silence for several moments before speaking. "Miss Cooper, are you aware that there have been 3 other accidents at Walton's mines in the past year, all resulting in deaths that were quickly ruled misfortune rather than negligence?" Scarlett's eyes widened. "I knew of 2. The Carson brothers last winter and Tom Whitley in the spring. There was another in his mine near Central City," the judge informed her. "Very similar circumstances, a support failure in a new tunnel that had been hastily constructed." Xavier leaned forward. "You've been investigating Walton already?" Judge Harmon nodded. "The mining inspector in Denver has had suspicions for some time, but evidence was lacking. Witnesses either died in the collapses or were paid to remain silent." His gaze fixed on Scarlett. "Your testimony could be the key to finally bringing charges that will stick." "I'll testify to everything I saw," Scarlett promised. "But you should know Walton has sent men to meet you with bribes." A cold smile touched the judge's lips. "I'm well aware of Mr. Walton's methods. This won't be the first time a wealthy man has attempted to purchase justice from me." His expression hardened. "It will go no better for him than it did for the others." As the stagecoach approached Silver Creek, Judge Harmon outlined his plan. He would proceed as if unaware of the true circumstances, allowing Walton to believe his influence was working. Meanwhile, he would issue subpoenas for witnesses and evidence, building a case that would be impossible to dismiss. "Miss Cooper, you'll need to remain somewhere safe until the hearing," the judge advised. "Mr. Walton will be desperate to silence you once he realizes I'm taking the matter seriously." "She's staying with the Miller family," Xavier informed him. "Good people, respected in town. Many of the miners stand with her." Judge Harmon nodded approvingly. "Strength in numbers. Wise." He turned to Scarlett. "Miss Cooper, I must warn you, standing against a man like Walton means putting yourself at considerable risk. Are you certain you wish to proceed? Scarlett's chin lifted with the now familiar determination Xavier had come to admire. "Completely certain, Your Honor. Alexander Walton left me to die. I won't allow him to do the same to others." The judge's eyes crinkled with respect. "Very well. Mr. Porter, I assume you'll continue to serve as Miss Cooper's protector." Xavier nodded, feeling Scarlett's gaze on him. "For as long as needed, Your Honor." "Good," Judge Harmon said with finality. "Then let us proceed to town and begin the process of justice." The stage rolled into Silver Creek shortly after 2 o'clock, causing a stir as townspeople gathered to witness the judge's arrival. As expected, Alexander Walton himself stood waiting at the stage station, flanked by his foreman and 2 well-dressed associates who Xavier guessed were lawyers brought in from Denver. Judge Harmon stepped down from the coach with dignity, acknowledging Walton with a neutral nod before turning back to assist his fellow passengers. Walton's expression changed from confident welcome to shock, and then barely concealed rage as Scarlett emerged, supported by Xavier. "Judge Harmon," Walton began smoothly, recovering quickly. "Welcome to Silver Creek. We've arranged accommodations for you at—" "Thank you, Mr. Walton, but I'll be staying at the hotel," the judge interrupted politely but firmly. "And I'll be convening court at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I suggest you and your counsel be present." With a tip of his hat, he turned away, effectively dismissing the mine owner. Xavier guided Scarlett quickly toward Charlie Miller's wagon, which waited nearby as planned. He could feel Walton's eyes boring into their backs as they moved away. "That man would kill me where I stand if he could," Scarlett murmured, shivering slightly despite the warm afternoon sun. "He won't get the chance," Xavier assured her, his hand instinctively moving to his revolver. Back at the Miller house, they found a gathering of miners and their families waiting for news. Judge Harmon's reputation for fairness had preceded him, raising hopes that justice might finally touch Silver Creek. As Scarlett described their meeting with the judge and his plans for the hearing, Xavier watched the faces around him transform with renewed determination. These people had lived too long under Alexander Walton's thumb, he realized. Scarlett's stand against him had become a symbol of resistance for the entire community. The thought filled Xavier with both pride in her courage and fear for her safety. Walton would recognize the threat she posed to his power, and desperate men took desperate measures. That evening, as the miners dispersed to spread word of the next day's hearing, Xavier found Scarlett sitting alone on the Miller's back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. He sat beside her, offering a cup of coffee which she accepted with a grateful smile. "Tomorrow will change everything," she said softly. "One way or another." Xavier nodded, studying her profile in the fading light. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," Scarlett admitted, surprising him with her candor. "Not of testifying of what comes after. If Walton is convicted, this town will need to rebuild. The mine employs half the men in Silver Creek." "You're thinking beyond your own justice," Xavier observed. "Most wouldn't." Scarlett turned to face him, her expression earnest. "This was my father's home. These people were his friends. I want justice, but not at the cost of destroying the community." "The mine will continue operating," Xavier assured her. "Men like Walton may own the business, but it's men like Charlie and Gus who know how to actually run it. The town will adapt." "And you?" Scarlett asked quietly. "What will you do once this is over?" The question caught Xavier off guard, though he'd been asking himself the same thing with increasing frequency. 5 days ago, he'd have said he'd move on, continuing his aimless wandering. Now, the thought of leaving Silver Creek, of leaving Scarlett, created an unexpected hollowness in his chest. "I haven't decided," he answered honestly. "For the first time in years, I'm considering staying somewhere. Hope flickered in Scarlett's eyes, quickly masked behind careful restraint. Silver Creek could use a man with your skills. The miners have been talking about forming a protective association, hiring someone to ensure safety standards are maintained regardless of who owns the mine. Is that so? Xavier smiled slightly. And would this position come with any personal incentives to stay? A blush colored Scarlett's cheeks, visible even in the dimming light. That would depend on the man considering it, I suppose. Xavier reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. And if that man had found himself thinking about you far more than is proper for someone he's known less than a week? Scarlett's fingers curled around his, her touch warming him more than the coffee ever could. Then I would say he's as foolish as I am. Or perhaps just equally affected by our extraordinary circumstances. Is that what this is? Xavier asked softly. Just a reaction to danger and rescue? I don't know, Scarlett admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I only know that the thought of you leaving once this is over hurts in a way I didn't expect. Xavier's free hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb gently tracing the curve of her jawline. Then perhaps I should stay long enough for us both to discover what this is. In the gathering twilight, with the scent of pine and wood smoke in the air, and the distant sound of the town preparing for night, Xavier Porter leaned forward and kissed Scarlett Cooper. It was a gentle kiss, a question more than a demand, and when she responded with equal tenderness, something long dormant inside him burst into bloom. When they finally parted, Scarlett's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the sensation. When she opened them, the look of wonder and affection there made Xavier's breath catch. Well, she said softly, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I believe that clarifies things somewhat. Xavier laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Indeed it does, Miss Cooper. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Charlie Miller clearing his throat loudly as he stepped onto the porch. Sorry to intrude, he said, not looking particularly sorry, but there's someone here you both should meet. They followed Charlie inside to find a thin, nervous-looking man waiting in the parlor. He twisted his hat in his hands, eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting pursuit. This is Jim Holloway, Charlie introduced him. He's Walton's bookkeeper. Xavier tensed immediately, hand moving toward his gun, but Scarlett stepped forward. Mr. Holloway, she greeted him calmly. What brings you here? The bookkeeper swallowed hard. Miss Cooper, I have information about Mr. Walton, about what really happened in that mine. Hope flared in Scarlett's expression. You were there, Holloway shook his head. No, but afterward. I overheard Mr. Walton talking with the foreman. They planned it, Miss Cooper. They deliberately weakened those supports, Walton said. He paused, glancing nervously at Xavier. He said you were getting too popular with the miners. Said your honest assaying was costing him money. He wanted to scare you into leaving town, but when you found the weakened supports, he decided to eliminate me permanently, Scarlett finished grimly. The bookkeeper nodded miserably. I should have come forward sooner, but Walton, he knows things about me, things I've done for him that weren't strictly legal. Xavier stepped forward. You're willing to testify to this before Judge Harmon? Yes, Holloway said with sudden resolution. Walton's planning to leave town after the hearing tomorrow, taking the company funds with him. He's already contacted buyers for the mine. Once he's gone, dozens of families will lose everything. His shoulders straightened slightly. I can't let that happen, not anymore. Scarlett exchanged a glance with Xavier, hope and determination mingling in her expression. Mr. Holloway, you've just changed everything. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold, the first real hint of winter touching the mountain air. Xavier walked beside Scarlett toward the town hall where Judge Harmon had established his temporary court, acutely aware of the eyes that followed them. Word of Jim Holloway's defection had spread quickly, and Alexander Walton's allies watched them with barely concealed hostility. The town hall was packed when they arrived, miners and their families filling most of the seats, with Walton's business associates and a few wealthy townspeople clustered near the front. Alexander Walton himself sat at a table with his lawyers, his face a mask of confident composure that faltered only briefly when Jim Holloway entered, escorted by Sheriff Daniels. Judge Harmon called the hearing to order precisely at 9, his commanding presence silencing the room immediately. He explained the purpose of the proceedings, to determine if sufficient evidence existed to hold Alexander Walton for trial on charges of attempted murder, criminal negligence, and obstruction of justice. Scarlett was called first, rising with quiet dignity to take the oath. As she recounted the events in the mine, her voice remained steady, even when describing the moment Walton had struck her and left her to die. Xavier watched the jury of townspeople, half miners, half businessmen, as the judge had stipulated, and saw the horror growing on their faces as Scarlett's testimony continued. When she described Xavier digging through the collapse with his bare hands, many eyes turned to him, noting the still healing cuts visible on his skin. Walton's lawyer attempted to shake her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting she had imagined Walton's actions due to her concussion, but Scarlett remained unflappable. "Mr. Reynolds," she said to the lawyer with cold precision, "I assayed ore worth millions of dollars for your client. He trusted my judgment completely when it came to evaluating gold. Are you now suggesting my observational skills failed only when witnessing his attempt to murder me?" The lawyer retreated, and Scarlett returned to her seat beside Xavier, who squeezed her hand briefly in silent support. Jim Holloway's testimony followed, his nervous delivery somehow making his account even more compelling. He produced company records showing Walton had ordered reduced expenditures on tunnel support, specifically in the West Tunnel, despite engineering reports warning of unstable conditions. Most damning, he recounted Walton's own words after the collapse: "One troublesome woman buried, and a lesson to any miner thinking of challenging me. 2 problems solved at once." Throughout the testimony, Xavier watched Walton's face, noting the progression from confidence to concern to barely concealed panic as the evidence mounted against him. When the judge called a brief recess before final statements, Walton huddled with his lawyers, gesturing angrily as they spoke in urgent whispers. "He's realizing he can't buy his way out of this," Scarlett observed quietly. Xavier nodded. "Men like Walton always believe themselves untouchable until the moment they fall. That's when they're most dangerous." As if to prove his point, when court resumed, Walton's demeanor had changed dramatically. Gone was the confident businessman. In his place sat a desperate man, eyes darting toward the exits as his lawyers made final, unconvincing arguments for his innocence. Judge Harmon's decision was swift and unequivocal. Sufficient evidence exists to hold Alexander Walton for trial on all charges. Bail is denied due to the serious nature of the crimes and evidence of flight risk. He turned to Sheriff Daniels. "Sheriff, secure the prisoner for transport to Denver, where he will await trial." As the sheriff moved to take Walton into custody, chaos erupted. With surprising speed, Walton overturned the heavy oak table, sending it crashing into the sheriff and his deputy. In the same motion, he drew a concealed derringer from his vest and pointed it directly at Scarlett. "You ruined everything," he snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. Xavier moved instinctively, throwing himself toward Scarlett as the gun discharged. Pain lanced through his shoulder as the bullet meant for Scarlett's heart found his flesh instead. He collided with her, bearing them both to the floor as pandemonium broke out in the courtroom. Through a haze of pain, Xavier was aware of shouts, the sounds of struggle, and then Judge Harmon's voice booming for order. Scarlett's hands pressed against his wound, her face pale with fear above him. "Xavier, stay with me, do you hear? Xavier." He tried to reassure her he was fine, but darkness was encroaching at the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was Scarlett's face, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks as she called his name. Xavier drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments of reality like glimpses through a fog. Dr. Wright's concerned face, Scarlett's voice, sometimes pleading, sometimes reading aloud, pain that flared and receded in waves. Fevered dreams where he was back in the collapsed mine, digging frantically, but never reaching her. When he finally emerged fully into consciousness, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar curtains, casting patterns across a bedroom he didn't recognize. He tried to sit up, only to fall back with a groan as pain radiated from his shoulder. "Easy," came Scarlett's voice, and then she was there, her cool hand on his forehead. "You'll tear the stitches." "Walton," he managed to ask, his throat dry and voice raspy. "In custody," Scarlett assured him, helping him take small sips of water. He didn't get far. Half the miners in town tackled him before he reached the door. Relief washed over Xavier. "How long?" "4 days," Scarlett told him, her expression softening. "The bullet went clean through your shoulder, but you developed a fever. Dr. Wright wasn't sure." Her voice faltered. "We were afraid we might lose you." Xavier reached for her hand with his uninjured arm, squeezing it weakly. "Takes more than Alexander Walton to get rid of me." A small smile touched Scarlett's lips. "So I'm learning." As strength gradually returned, Xavier learned he was in Scarlett's cottage, which had been cleaned and restored by the miners' wives while he was unconscious. Scarlett had refused to leave his side throughout his fever, sleeping in a chair beside the bed, despite Dr. Wright's admonitions that she needed rest for her own healing. "Stubborn woman," he chided her weakly when he heard this. "I learned from the best," she retorted. A certain cowboy who dug through a collapsed mine with his bare hands. On the 5th day after the shooting, Xavier was strong enough to sit up in bed while Scarlett brought him news of the town. Alexander Walton had been transported to Denver under heavy guard, and the federal prosecutor was preparing a case that included not just the attempt on Scarlett's life, but the previous mining deaths as well. More surprisingly, the miners had formed a cooperative and purchased the Silver Creek mine from the bank that held Walton's loans. Charlie Miller had been elected superintendent, with Gus as foreman. The first change they'd implemented was hiring a full-time safety inspector, a position they hoped Xavier would consider once he recovered. "They're quite serious," Scarlett told him, perched on the edge of his bed. "The cooperative needs someone who understands both mining operations and security. Your experience in the cavalry makes you ideal." Xavier studied her face, seeing the careful neutrality she maintained while delivering this information. "And how would the town's assayer feel about me taking such a position?" A blush colored Scarlett's cheeks. "The town's assayer would be professionally pleased to work with someone who values safety over profit." "Just professionally," Xavier pressed, enjoying the deepening of her blush. Scarlett met his eyes directly, abandoning pretense. "No, not just professionally." Xavier reached for her hand, drawing her closer until she was beside him on the bed. "I should tell you I'm considering putting down roots, for the first time in years." "Are you?" Scarlett asked softly, hope brightening her expression. "Here in Silver Creek." "Here," Xavier confirmed, his free hand rising to cup her cheek. "With you, if you'll have me." Tears shimmered in Scarlett's eyes. "I nearly lost you before I truly had you, Xavier Porter. Don't you dare think of leaving now." "Never," he promised, drawing her down for a kiss that sealed his words more surely than any contract could. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning, Xavier Porter stood in Silver Creek's small church, watching as Scarlett Cooper walked toward him in a gown of ivory satin. Her auburn hair was crowned with wildflowers, and the smile she wore outshone the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. The Silver Creek mine operated more safely and profitably than ever under the miners' cooperative, with Xavier overseeing security and safety measures that had already prevented 2 potential disasters. Scarlett's assaying business had expanded to serve neighboring communities as well, her reputation for honesty and precision bringing clients from as far as Denver. Alexander Walton had been convicted on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The miners he had exploited found justice not just in his punishment, but in claiming ownership of their own labor and future. As Scarlett reached him at the altar, Xavier took her hands in his, marveling at how tragedy had led to such unexpected joy. The woman who had fallen into his arms from the darkness of a collapsed mine now stood before him in light and life, choosing to join her future with his. "I love you," he whispered as she reached his side. "And I love you," she answered, her green eyes bright with happiness. "My rescuer, my heart." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed his bride with all the tenderness and passion that had grown between them since that desperate day of digging through stone and earth. What had begun as rescue had become redemption for both of them. Scarlett and Xavier Porter built their life together in Silver Creek, their home becoming a gathering place for miners and their families. As the years passed, children's laughter filled rooms once silent and empty, and the town itself flourished under the cooperative stewardship. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Xavier would look at his wife and remember the moment she had first fallen into his arms, covered in dust and barely conscious but alive gloriously, miraculously alive. In that moment, without realizing it, he had begun digging not just through a collapsed mine, but through the walls he'd built around his heart. And Scarlett, who had faced darkness and emerged stronger for it, would often take his scarred hands in hers and kiss each knuckle gently, a silent acknowledgement of all they had endured to find each other. Their love, forged in crisis and tested by fire, had become the foundation upon which they built a future neither had dared imagine before fate brought them together in the darkness of a silver mine.